Welcome in to the Blanket Coverage Podcast. Today is episode 304. We're going to be discussing all things Week 2 NFL in light of Week 3 of NFL, which starts tonight. We're going to be trying to do these episodes on Monday and Wednesday as opposed to Wednesday and Thursday, but sometimes getting our schedules to line up can be a little bit tricky, but we're going to try to do college on Monday and NFL on Wednesday. But if you're here joining us, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I am joined by my co-host, Jack Wallace. Jack, how are things up in Syracuse?
They are starting to cool off a little bit. We're going to be seeing 60s, like about high 60s, and the temperatures coming up this week, which is pretty good fall weather. Again, fall is actually not too bad up here. So as bad as the winter is, but the fall is really not that bad. So I'm looking forward to some of that weather coming in through September and I guess early October. Before we have seen it. They said snow can't happen for Halloween, so you can get snow as early as late October. But I don't know if that'll happen up here yet.
I'd love to see that.
Not at least for a while. I mean, it's a rainy, gross day today, but no snow, of course. A little too early for that.
It's sunny and 75 in Nashville. You couldn't ask for much better weather than we have right now.
That's what we were having a lot yesterday.
But we've earned it because it's been raining for about a week straight. Which is not great for my seasonal depression.
No, it never is. But we can now look a little bit at baseball, which, speaking of some not entirely super happy things, there are a bunch of teams on here that, haven't really had a great fall to start off. And of some of those, we're going to mention the San Diego Padres because this team has completely and absolutely collapsed down the stretch. And honestly, the Cincinnati Reds have too. In lieu of the very incredible run by the St. Louis Cardinals, a team that is 10-0 in their last 10, and they're on an 11-game winning streak, the longest in the entire league. Again, I know we've talked about it a million times on here about this team's playoff odds, absolutely shooting through the roof, and they're now at 95%, nearly a lock. So pretty incredible work there. They're really shooting up. It looks like the other team to get there will probably be the Dodgers, considering that they already have the lock-in on the playoff, and it's looking more and more like the Giants are going to pull away with the division. They're sitting at 74%, so it looks like those are the two most likely teams to make those wild card spots. In terms of the other division leaders, Milwaukee, Chicago, the White Sox, and the Rays, and the Astros, those four teams, you talked about them a lot. None of them have clinched, but they're all very, very close to clinching. Next episode, I'm certain that I think all of them will have clinched. Though Tampa Bay did officially clinch a playoff spot last night, so the Rays are good to go, as well as the Brewers earlier out in the NL. And then the only other team still in the mix is Atlanta. I know I mentioned their odds last time, kind of went back down again due to the Phillies getting the good wins in a row, and Atlanta not doing too great through the Giants series, but they were able to pull it back in. 2 wins in a row against the Diamondbacks, and they're playing again tonight. Braves heavily favored, should win that one again, and their odds are up to 88%. Philly is down to just 12, so love to see that there. Oakland is officially moved into the basically done category as they're nearly out of the playoffs. Cincinnati and Seattle are both on very big life support. Toronto's odds have kind of flip-flopped back and forth, but they're now at 61%. And then finally the Yankees at 41% still look like it's going to be kind of tough, but we don't know yet. In terms of magic numbers, teams are starting to get those pushed to the wire too. I know the Braves is sitting at 9, and at least the tragic numbers, mind you, which are usually a little more fun, are the inverse of that, how long until elimination. And so far the Indians could be eliminated within actually today. They're sitting at 1. 10.5 games behind is usually pretty hard to come back in a week. So that one's going to be a little tricky for them. Oakland at 7, Seattle at 8, and then Toronto at 10. They're seeming a little safer. And then out in the NL, the Rockies are sitting at 1, Mets at 2. So those two will likely be wrapped up within, even before really the weekend really kicks off. I know today's Thursday, but still. And then San Diego at 6, and both Philly and Cincy at 7. So Rays coming down to the wire. By the time last game comes in by next week, when we're out doing all of our podcasts for Week 4 college football, Week 3 NFL, it'll be very likely that a lot of these will have wrapped up, and we're getting closer and closer to baseball playoffs beginning. So very excited about that. Looking forward to it a lot. I know since our last podcast, I'm pretty sure Detroit, the Chicago Cubs, and the Angels are all out. Length is getting them pretty long for teams that are eliminated. It's obviously going to continue there as only 5 teams from each of the leagues are going to make it, which I think, again, is a good thing. I like this more limited, but excited to see how the playoffs shape up.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into some football. Recapping our picks from last week, I was 12-4 on the week. Had a pretty decent gambling day, despite getting absolutely hammered early in the day. And I mean in the gambling sense, not in the drinking sense. But I ended up 12-4 on the day on picks, and then you were 10-6. And I believe at one point we were tied, and then I had like 4 different picks than you in the later games, and then ended up going like 4-0.
It was the 4-0 was on 2 separate things because it was both days with college football and NFL. Both days I was ahead, and both days the 2-0 went to you both times. So that was very disappointing on my end, but still, I don't know if I would have picked mine very differently. I think Cowboys and Chargers was pretty much a toss-up. Ended up being basically a toss-up game watching it. And then, of course, Seattle, Tennessee was, anybody's game for a lot of that. Even Seattle, then Tennessee, and back and forth overtime. We'll get to that game later, but lots of games that were very entertaining this weekend to watch, and we'll dive right on into that. But so to look ahead at week 2 here, there were a lot of interesting things to think about, sort of who are the real contenders and who are not. Because, week 1, obviously, it's very difficult to really look at that. But then this week's a little more interesting because on this one, we say I had, and there are a lot of games that I think you could pick as game of the week here. And I personally thought the best one on here, and more for the narrative more than the actual stat line in the games, was Kansas City, Baltimore Sunday Night Football. And the biggest reason why I had this one here is because Lamar finally did it. He got past the Chiefs in the regular season, and he looked pretty good doing it. I know the 2 early interceptions weren't good, and I'm not going to let those slide, including one in pick 6. But when he needed to make the big plays to get it done, he did. And he was able to win in a game that a lot of people over a lot of time was saying that he couldn't do or he wasn't good enough, whatever. And he proved that it's not bad for a running back. And he did what he needed to do to win.
Really not. It's really not. No, I think Lamar is a good quarterback, and obviously better than good quarterback, a great quarterback, and what he brings on the ground is so much greater than even Kyler Murray, who we know is a great scrambler, a great runner of the football, but he's not the type of runner with consistency that Lamar is. He can't take those hits because he's so small, and he's obviously electric scrambling around in the backfield on those passing plays. But as more of a designed runner, Lamar has such a talent, and he just brings something to the game that you have to prepare for differently than every other team, because he's a better runner than Jalen Hurts. He's a better runner than Kyler Murray. He's a way better runner than Deshaun Watson, and all of these guys are good runners. But you look at Lamar Jackson and the threat that he brings on the ground, even though he's not quite there in the air. And I think that's going to be his detriment when it comes to the playoffs. When you get late in the playoffs and you have to play from behind and you have to come back. But they played from behind for most of this game, and we're still able to come back just by sticking with the run. And obviously that's what the Raiders, that's what John Harbaugh, that's what Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator, that's what they want to do. They want to run you into the ground, and they want to keep running you into the ground. And their defense was able to come up with enough plays where it didn't matter. And there was a moment in this game, it's why it's game of the week, where we thought, oh, the Chiefs are just going to drive down. It's a lock. The Chiefs are going to drive down. Patrick Mahomes, game-winning throw. And that didn't happen. And the detriment of the Chiefs, the entire game was on the ground, where they were outgained. Listen to this number, 251-62 on the ground. That is quite the disparity in the rushing game. And that ended up being the difference in the game. But the big difference in the game was related to the ground, which was Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's fumble with about 2 minutes left to go. The Chiefs still had all their timeouts. They still had a chance. And then Lamar Jackson on 4th and 1 put the game away. It was a very I liken it to a baseball closer. If you have Lamar Jackson on the ground to end the game, same with Derrick Henry. I think they share the same sentiment. If you have Lamar Jackson at the end of a game and you have 1 yard to go, it's game over. He's just a great closer, and I think that is really the strength of the Ravens. If they can play from ahead this season and really get the running game going, this is going to be a dangerous team once again, despite all their injuries and a little bit of problems that they have in their secondary.
And I agree with that. I think it's been interesting to see, especially the prowess that Lamar Jackson's had on the ground. I know we talked about the air has been an issue, and that's been something hurting him, but 16 carries for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns is still impressive. And how about Hollywood Brown getting it done? 6 receptions for 113 yards and a score. So a guy that I know that, I mean, we both have talked about as not being a very super high guy in fantasy, but ended up being very productive in this game. So did a very solid job on his end.
Let's talk about the Chiefs defense right quick, because the Chiefs defense 2 weeks in a row has been a point of concern, really. I mean, the last week they let Baker Mayfield really do whatever he wanted to through the air, and they could not stop the combination of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt on the ground. And then this week you give up another 200-yard game to Lamar Jackson and to Tyson Williams, and Latavius Murray was getting some playing time in there. I think Devontae Freeman saw the field at one point. This Ravens run game is really, really good, but I do think it's a point of concern for the Chiefs that they're just getting run all over, and they really need to be able to hold up for their offense to be able to score as many points as they can, because the offense can't run the ball, really. If you can't run the ball, you got to be able to put up points, and obviously the Chiefs can, but with really a single faceted offense, this defense has to step up a little bit more. Teams are just going to be able to possess the ball like the Ravens were, outgaining the Chiefs in time of possession 35-24 and that's in minutes. So it's a real point of concern that the Chiefs defense is on the field as much as they are, because if Patrick Mahomes doesn't have the ball and you're just getting run all over, that's not a recipe for success in the NFL.
Indeed. And last other point on here was also Travis Kelce had another fantastic game in here, but a little weird how Tyreek Hill was not big in this game.
Well, they doubled him the entire game. They took him out from the start. They said, we'll give up those little seam routes to Kelce. We'll give up those little 10 yards over the middle. You're not getting the 70-yard Tyreek Hill completion. And they did a really good job of eliminating him from the game plan, and that might be the game plan going forward against the Chiefs, is just eliminate Tyreek Hill from the game plan, make Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle and Mecole Hardman beat you.
Yeah, and that may need to happen if this team is going to see a lot of success, or other teams, are going to see a lot of success against them. So big point there. Good point for the Chiefs, though. Chargers and at the Eagles come up next. We'll be able to see them against some other high-firing offenses, and at least how that may work, or at least the Eagles. I mean, offenses work better than we've expected so far, but we'll see how that will look against them. Moving on, we got some other games coming up here, the whole rest of the slate, and we're going to start off with Washington and New York, the G-Men, the Giants of New York. And, this is a game that was the best way to describe this game was agonizing if you're a Giants fan, because, I mean, oh boy, this game really exposed. I mean, I don't know about exposed because it was kind of obvious from the get-go, but exposed a lot of problems that we've seen with this Giants team. And part of it was just like the way it ended was so painful. But Washington wins on an absolutely ridiculous ending. Hopkins' field goal is no good, but Dexter Lawrence, of all players, jumped off sides as Washington missed their kick. Then they get to go again 5 yards closer, and of course, Hopkins nails it, and Washington football team walks away with a win. Heineke under center ended up having a pretty solid game, as well as McLaurin out on the wide end. And what did this game prove to you?
This game proved to me that Washington's defense is a little bit overrated. And I've heard this point made. It is not an original thought of mine, but if we look at the last season, after their bye week, which was week 8, And this defense really turned it on later in the year. Obviously, Chase Young was a monster. That defensive line was all over the place, all in the backfield. But look at this schedule: New York Giants, Detroit Lions, Cincinnati Bengals, Dallas Cowboys, Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's Dallas without Dak Prescott, San Francisco 49ers, Seattle Seahawks, Carolina Panthers, and Philadelphia Eagles. That is not, those are not good quarterbacks with the exception of the Seattle Seahawks and Russell Wilson. They really didn't have to play any great quarterbacks last year. And if you're not playing great quarterbacks, it's not that hard to have success if you can scheme up a defensive game plan really well, like we know Ron Rivera can. And we know this defense is obviously talented, but I think they're a little bit overrated based on the fact that Daniel Jones was able to pass for 249 yards and a touchdown and really was able to run. That was the key thing. He was able to run wherever he wanted on the field. They were really hitting that read option hard. 9 attempts, 95 yards and a touchdown, had a 46-yard run in there. So the Washington D-line, yes, they had 4 sacks, but they also allowed Daniel Jones to scramble for 95 yards. And I don't know what that means for the rest of the season, but it can't be good when you allow Daniel Jones to really go off. And, I mean, let's face it, they were bailed out by Dexter Lawrence jumping off sides.
True, but I do want to give credit to Daniel Jones in this game either way. I mean, I know that he's been a guy who's been scrutinized for a while and mostly for good reason, but he still had 249 yards in the score. And again, 95 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And he was very effective on the ground, did his job fairly well. I know he had a super long run that was called back too. I mean, I got to give him some credit here. I know that he's still not even remotely in the upper echelon of quarterbacks in the league or anything, but I think against a Washington defense that still is talented, I think that he deserves a good chunk of credit here. And then Sterling Shepard also with a great outing too, 9 receptions for 94 yards. So got to give this Giants offense some credit, something that I didn't think I'd be saying a lot this season, but I think they're deserving of it. Next up, we have Buffalo against Miami, and this one was not too fun if you're a Miami fan. Buffalo Wow, Buffalo absolutely annihilates the Dolphins 35-0. It's the largest shutout win the Bills have had over Miami since 1966. It's been a minute. So, yeah, Buffalo asserting their dominance, flexing their muscles. Again, Josh Allen, still not the big-time breakout game we were expecting, but still pretty good. Devin Singletary actually did pretty good work here, 82 yards and a touchdown. But Myles Gaskin did nothing, and Jacoby Brissett had to come in for an injured Tua, and he did very little. And, yeah, this Miami team still needs a lot of work left in it. It's very clear that it's not ready for any kind of big thing, at least right now. But, yeah, this was a pretty tough one for Miami fans to swallow.
And it's not going to get any easier for Miami, especially if Tua is going to be out, which, look, I don't want to talk trash about Tua getting injured, but let's face it, Tua hasn't looked that great this year. I know he had a decent week in week 1, but he was a little bit checked down, Charlie. They were able to get some plays to Jalen Waddle, and they just had a good offensive game plan in that game, and their defense ended up coming big for him with a fumble. But it's not going to get any easier for them. They got the Raiders, the Colts, and the Buccaneers coming up. And without Tua, this season could go down the drain fast for the Dolphins. But I do want to talk about the Bills, because this was the ultimate revenge game from a team that laid an absolute egg in week 1. This was a team that they came out, the Steelers took it to them. They really didn't do anything in the second half. It was a down week for Josh Allen, and still not a great outing for Josh Allen in week 2, but they were able to get enough done through the air and through the ground. I mean, it was only 17 for 33, 179. We might see a little bit of regression for Josh Allen, and that's why I didn't pick him as the MVP. I like him this year, but it might take some time for this offense to get into a swing this year, a little longer than we thought. But it was the same last year, and the defense showed up. And I think the Bills could still be really good. I think they're still the favorites to win the AFC East, but here come the Patriots, is all I'm going to say.
Exactly. No, the Patriots look like they're going to be a little bit more back into what they normally were as a team that tends to be pretty strong in this division. Now, again, Bills Patriots will be quite the interesting matchup. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, the AFC is going to be a little more entertaining than we may have thought preseason. But at least between these two competitors, yeah, that wasn't the case. But next up, we can move on to Chicago versus Cincinnati, an upset call that I ended up getting incorrect here, which I still don't necessarily regret picking this, as it ended up being a pretty close game, and the Bengals did look better than the Bears did last week, but it ended up not being true. And now Justin Fields did come in for an injured Andy Dalton. Didn't really do a ton, though, but the problem was Burrow throwing 3 picks on 3 straight passing attempts. That's the reason why they lost this game.
Not great. I really think, and I'm trying to go and find the tweet here in my bookmarks, but I don't want to wish injury on anyone, obviously. We've said that. I feel like I'm always making a disclaimer out of that. But I think Andy Dalton getting hurt might have saved Matt Nagy's job, at least for this season. He might still get fired in the offseason. Who knows? But I think Andy Dalton might have just saved Matt Nagy's job by getting hurt. And let me tell you why. Because Andy Dalton's average depth of target. Now, this was not a good day through the air for Justin Fields. He looked like a rookie quarterback. He looked like he was having trouble seeing what the defenses were doing. It's just something you got to get used to. Rookie quarterbacks are going to look like rookie quarterbacks at times. But he was able to make some plays with his legs. That's obviously an area where Andy Dalton does not exactly excel. And I want you to take a look at this because we talk about aggression in the NFL. You want to have that subtle balance between being aggressive and throwing downfield and stretching the defense out and being checked down Charlie like Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's average depth of throw, and this is from Andrew Erickson on Twitter, Andy Dalton's average depth of throw was 4.6 yards. That's under 5 yards per attempt. That's where he's trying to get the receivers the ball. That is the ultimate check down Charlie. And that would be good for last in the league. So Andy Dalton joins the check down Charlie Hall of Fame this year. But Justin Fields, when he came into the game, his average depth of throw, 10.5 yards, and that is good for first in the league. So maybe a little bit over aggressive. We know that they love the deep passing game at Ohio State. When Justin Fields was there, he's a terrific deep ball thrower. The decision making has got to get better. Some of the ball placements got to get better. He's got to get better at getting the ball out. But it's going to open this offense so much more just to let Justin Fields make his mistakes and grow as an NFL quarterback in the game rather than sabotaging your team with check down Charlie back there and Andy Dalton. It's going to
I think that offense. It's the dynamic offense they want to have, which we know that Chicago hasn't had in a while. So that's why I understood the Justin Fields pick, and that's why I think that it could end up working. It just takes a minute.
I don't even think Matt Nagy wants a dynamic offense. I think Matt Nagy's just an idiot. Quite honestly.
I mean, based on how far the offense has been for the Bears over the last good while, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, there's not a whole lot of success to write home about.
Matt Nagy should still be fired out of a cannon into Lake Michigan.
There's the quote for social media right there.
Oh, that was in my week 1 takeaways last week. That's a direct quote, and it's still my opinion. But for the time being, I think Justin Fields has bought Matt Nagy another 8 weeks.
Yeah, I would agree with that very much. Now we can move on to a game that we thought was going to be pretty terrible and ended up being actually somewhat competitive, and that was Houston versus Cleveland. Yeah, at least for me, I thought that Cleveland was going to win this game by at least 20, and it turns out that wasn't the case, with Houston putting up quite the fight. Actually, tied it at several occasions, brought it up to 14-21 Cleveland at halftime. The Browns were able to pull away, 14-all, I think, at halftime, and then Cleveland was able to pull away a little bit, outscoring the Texans 17-7 in the second half to get a 10-point win. But yeah, the Houston actually looked somewhat competent in this game, getting a good chunk of points here, getting a lot of yards. I mean, 302 yards, 17 first downs, and Tyrod Taylor going 10 for 11, 125 yards and a touchdown, which isn't a ton, but got that down. I think he's injured too, right? Yeah, he was injured, got knocked out of the game, which and the Davis Mills will be starting. But yeah, it was weird because Houston played a game that I was like, oh, okay, like maybe they're not that awful that I thought they were going to be. And, I think now I can pretty solidly say that Houston, I don't think, will be the worst team in the league this year, which I really didn't think I would be saying that.
No, I think that crown is going to go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are very much the early favorite, and the AFC South is kind of a disaster right now.
Yes.
We'll talk about Carson Wentz here in a minute. But look, I don't think that the Houston Texans are that good, but it's the old cliche, these guys get paid to play football too. And I think a lot of teams are coming in basically, especially in the early season when we don't know anything about the Texans yet, really. I think they're coming in and kind of treating it like a bye week, not taking it quite as serious, maybe looking ahead to some other games. We know for Cleveland, they were coming off of the heartbreaker in Kansas City. And I think that really does factor into play here when you're playing a team that everyone said has a real shot at going 0-16. But nice recovery from the Browns. Obviously, you'd like to see the defense play a little better in the first half, but they showed up in the second half. They came back, and they were able to really put it on the Texans. But the most important thing, the Texans covered.
They did. They did. That is true, which I probably wouldn't have called that, but good for them.
I don't know. Maybe Texans +8 tonight.
Perhaps.
If you're feeling frisky.
Next up, we have Indianapolis versus Los Angeles, the Rams, that is. And the Rams going on the road to face Indy, 0-1, Indy 1-0, LA, and they both will keep in those stat sheets with a 27-24 win for the Rams. Matt Stafford still looking pretty solid here, still undefeated for LA. Darrell Henderson actually getting on the action with 53 yards and a score. And then Cooper Kupp is very much solidifying himself as a wide receiver one with 9 receptions, 163 yards, and 2 touchdowns in a dominant performance. But yeah, this is looking like a very, very solid outing for the Rams. Now, again, it was a little bit tighter of a game than we would have hoped. Indianapolis actually had a lead in the fourth quarter, down 17-6, and then scoring twice in a row, including a 2-point conversion to get up 21-17. LA was able to close it out with a 38-yard field goal with 2:23 on the clock, and that ended up sealing it. But yeah, this was a game where, again, it seemed like a team like the Colts that we kind of put down as not being very good, played against a much better on-paper team with LA, and ended up playing all right. And that's why this week with Indianapolis at Tennessee is going to be a pretty interesting one, because we love seeing these teams that are sort of on the weird.
Not really, though, because you know who's starting for the Colts this week, most likely? Jacob Eason. Because Carson Wentz sprained not one, but both of his ankles on the same play.
I should have rolled
up on by Aaron Donald.
You'll enjoy this, actually. My professor is a long time Eagles fan, and he wrote on our news quiz yesterday. Actually, he wrote which he said that was on like the NFL's premier franchise, talking about the Eagles, which we all poked fun at. But he was saying of him, which disgraced former quarterbacks managed to break both of his ankles and won't play this week. And I could see the shots at Carson Wentz already. So Eagles fans were not wishing injury, but not really they aren't exactly upset that Carson Wentz is playing.
What did you expect? They're Philadelphians.
No, I know. And after being I never actually had been to Philadelphia before about a month ago, and I actually have been, and now yeah, yep. Philly
Fully
fans are
understand.
a different breed, so it was pretty entertaining to see that. But yeah, somehow breaking both the ankles, I totally forgot about that. So never mind. That game could have been interesting, but now it probably won't be. But yeah, with that, Indianapolis ends up losing that game, which is unfortunate for their continually sad franchise. At least since the Manning days. Next up, we have New England against New York Jets, and this game was a game I watched, not going to lie, not much of because this game was not extremely entertaining. 25 to
Pretty
6.
cut and dry.
I don't know if this is actually a scoregami or not. I don't know if we're keeping track of that with these, but it looked pretty close with it. Scoregami, if you're not familiar, is when you have unique score lines in any of NFL scoring games in the regular season. And 25 to 6 is a pretty weird score. And Zach Wilson looked pretty miserable. And I know that we talk about with Bill Belichick being very good against rookie quarterbacks. Of course, that was proven true time and time again. But this was pretty rough. Wilson with 4 interceptions, 210 yards. Even Michael Carter didn't do a ton on the ground either. And Mac Jones wasn't exactly exceptional. Didn't score a touchdown, 186 yards, but did get the job done under center. James White and Damian Harris led the way with touchdowns on the ground and a whole lot of field goals for Nick Folk. But yeah, this was not a very fun game. Not going to lie to you.
Look, Mac Jones is doing exactly what Bill Belichick wants Mac Jones to do, which is just checking it down, managing the game, and letting his running backs do the work. Which Damian Harris, for as much crap as I talked about Damian Harris in the preseason, and that I will never, ever draft a Patriots running back on my fantasy team, he did have 16 attempts for 62 yards, 1 touchdown, and then James White added another touchdown. And another 45 yards through the air. So they're really playing through their running backs despite their lack of receivers and letting their defense do the work because Zach Wilson was sacked 4 times and threw 4 picks. And I will say it until I die or until Bill Belichick retires at least. Never, ever, ever trust a rookie quarterback against Bill Belichick. He feasts. He just feasts. He plays games with their mind while they're back there. And Zach Wilson was actually asked straight up, if you remember when Darnold had to play the Patriots and said in the press conference that he was seeing ghosts. Zach Wilson was straight up asked in the press conference if he was seeing ghosts. And he said no, but the 4 interceptions tell me that that's complete cap. To use a word that the kids like nowadays.
Pretty colossal cap there, yeah.
That's some colossal cap because Zach Wilson was absolutely seeing ghosts. Went 19 for 33, 210 yards, but could not find the end zone and threw 4 picks. So, look, the book is not written on any of these guys. This is week 2. They're still learning how to be NFL quarterbacks, and they all look like rookie quarterbacks. But clearly, Mac Jones had the better defense here and the better coach, and that's what won them the game.
Next up, we have Philadelphia versus San Francisco, a game that was one that I think preseason we would have written off somewhat quickly. But now is a game that I thought would be fairly competitive, and it ended up being so. 17-11, San Francisco wins despite having a good chunk of the first half in Philadelphia's favor, but a touchdown with 12 seconds left from your own Jawan Jennings, go Vols, getting the touchdown right before the end of the half. And then Jimmy G with a run, Robbie Gould with a field goal, Jalen Hurts' touchdown, 2-point conversion failed, did not help the Eagles much in the end, but a pretty low-scoring game, but a pretty telling game. Jimmy Garoppolo actually playing very solidly here. Elijah Mitchell doing decently on the ground despite all the injuries in the running back room for the Niners. And then Jalen Hurts doing his Lamar Jackson impression of stat lines with 10 carries, 82 yards and a score, and 190 yards through the air on just above 50% passing. So, yeah, it's not really too bad of a game here for both these teams. A Philly team that I think, even though they're hosting a 49ers team we know is better than Philly on paper, a game they shouldn't exactly be winning in, but a game they were very competitive in. And I think also very telling how bad the Falcons defense is, seeing how Philly could score triple, the amount of points.
Well, and
on the
let's
road
not
against the Falcons versus at home here. So
and let's not discount this 49ers defense, which had a lot of injuries last year. They're coming back full strength this year. They lose Jason Verrett. That's not great. But other than that, they're still looking really solid. Fred Warner's still in there in the middle, mucking things up for the offense. What I want to point out here is that even though Jalen Hurts' completion percentage was not what you want it to be, just over 50%, he was 12 for 23. He did not turn the ball over. He fumbled once, didn't lose that fumble, didn't throw an interception, was only sacked twice. So you see what he can do with his legs, and then added 82 yards rushing on the ground with a touchdown. So I think Jalen Hurts can perfectly captain this offense to winning some games, especially in the NFC East. We have yet to see if Dallas is a legit team with Mike McCarthy coaching them. Their offense certainly looks legit, but we've got to see them convert some of those red zone chances. I'm really not that discouraged from what I've seen from the Eagles so far. And I think we forget how much talent this team had on defense, and that Doug Peterson was just kind of an idiot.
Well, let's get excited for Eagles at the Cowboys this weekend. That's going to be a game that I think could be a whole lot. So Monday Night Football, and I'm very excited for that game, which is one, again, a preseason, one that I'm excited for, but now could be quite interesting. So looking forward to how that game will handle out. Next up, we have Las Vegas up against the Pittsburgh Steelers out in Heinz Field. And this one was, again, a pretty impressive game for the Raiders, a team that just keep on climbing. This team has been a team that we kind of wrote off early on, but has looked good. And Derek Carr has looked really good. He leads the league in passing yards for the first 2 weeks, and by a lot. By a wide margin. Derek Carr has looked really solid, and he continues to keep it up. Henry Ruggs looked great this week. 5 receptions, 113 yards, and a score, including a huge 61-yard touchdown. And we know that Pittsburgh, we talked about up last week, how they played against the Bills and played strong and won well. And we were like, okay, that's legit. And then Vegas comes into Pittsburgh and says, nuh-uh, we're taking the win. And I don't know. I was saying it preseason, the AFC West, I don't think it's the Chiefs anymore, guaranteed every year, easy wins. And I think that statement's aging well. We've seen the Chargers play well, even though they did lose. We'll get to that, but they've played well. The Broncos have played better. Raiders obviously playing a lot better. The AFC West is looking to be maybe the surprise of all the divisions to be very solid this year, and Raiders bringing it up strong.
All right. Ben, I'm speaking directly to you, Big Ben. It's time to hang it up, man. Hang up the cleats. Nobody wants to see this train wreck anymore. It's been an absolute train wreck. And I realized that, yes, he completed 67% of his passes, but he passed 40 times and only ended up with 295 yards and an interception. He's hurt once again. Stop me if you've heard that one before. It's time to hang it up for Big Ben. And maybe Mike Tomlin will still lead them to a winning season this year. I have no idea what to expect from this Pittsburgh team week in, week out. They're well coached, obviously, as I was just saying, but with Big Ben back there looking like an absolute shell of himself, I'm not really sure what to expect. And with Najee Harris not really being able to do anything on the ground, this offensive line has not been able to get a push all year long so far. And it's not looking very impressive for the Steelers. But let's flip it to the other side, because the Raiders, who saw this coming? Not me. Not me. Raised. I wrote Derek Carr off before the season, and Derek Carr has come out and proved me wrong pretty consistently. Both Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards are really turning out some solid performances. Pittsburgh was obviously keying in on Darren Waller the whole game. Didn't really let him get loose for his normal 10 catches for 100 yards. But it didn't really matter when you've got Henry Ruggs who can really take the top off of the defense. So without a running game and with Darren Waller really getting taken out early, this was a really impressive performance from the Las Vegas Raiders. And I do want to look ahead at their schedule for the rest of the year, because this week they've got the Dolphins. We don't know what Tua's status is for that game. And even if Tua plays, they're still the Dolphins.
You said Daltons, like Andy.
No, the Dolphins. Yeah, I think they still have a decent chance to win against the Dolphins, and then they've got the Chargers, the Bears, and the Broncos. Those are 3 games that they could easily win. We could see the Las Vegas Raiders really make a case, if not for the AFC West title, because that really runs through Kansas City. If not for the NFC or the AFC West title, definitely for a wild card spot. This has been a really average team the past few years. And if they can step it up on defense, this could be a really, really good team the way Derek Carr is playing.
If they take care of the Chargers and Broncos, I think they'll make the playoffs. But especially with the 7th team added from last year, if they can take care of those 2 teams and really put them away, I think this division and who they play are good enough to make it further. But looking at a division that will, I don't know if it's going to have multiple playoff contenders this year, and this is the NFC South, but I will give it to them. Once again, for no reason, Carolina continues to get it done. Now, am I going to overly praise Carolina for being 2-0 versus the Raiders? No. And the reason why is because they barely beat the Jets and then beat down on the Saints team that is about as inconsistent as you could possibly imagine.
Let's not forget that the Saints were missing about half of their coaching staff going into this game.
Which is why I'm making that's why I'm making that point, because the Saints team was missing a lot. They didn't know what they were doing. It was all over the place. Jameis Winston looked absolutely horrible. It was
4 sacks, 2 interceptions.
Yeah, it was his lowest passer rating of his entire career.
Jameis 30 for 30 watch is back. It's officially back.
Oh, God, it was so bad. Yeah, throwing 2 interceptions, so we're on our way. But, yeah, this game was very wonderful to watch as a Falcons fan. My rent-free self really enjoyed it. 26-7, Panthers made it look very easy. C-Mac did whatever he wanted. Sam Darnold threw over 300 yards. Even Moore had a field day with 79 yards and a touchdown, DJ Moore. And, yeah, this was pretty easy. Carolina didn't really struggle at all here, but again, I think it's more the fact that New Orleans was missing a million people than Carolina being legit. I know they're 2-0 and that looks good, and I get they play Houston tonight, and this team will probably be 3-0. But then at Dallas after that, I don't know if they're winning that game. I'm still not fully sold on Carolina just because I think their start of the season hasn't been that difficult. And again, if you look at their overall schedule, Carolina's season really isn't that hard, except the last 4 games. At Buffalo, Tampa Bay, at New Orleans, at Tampa Bay. So that's going to be the stretch, is to see how good is Carolina going to be before that stretch, and that's going to determine their playoff odds. But
well, look, they are number 1 in the league, and granted, they played a terrible Jets offense in Zach Wilson's first start, and then they played a Saints team that was missing about half of their coaching staff, mostly on the offense. But this is a team that's first overall in the league in defensive yards, and they're first overall in the league in first downs allowed. They're first in passing yards, first in rushing yards, and first in average time of possession. So this is a frisky defense. This is a defense that can do some things and keep Sam Darnold in enough games. And I'm not saying Sam Darnold is a world beater, but the post-Adam Gase bump, as we were saying last week, is a real thing. And we're seeing that in Carolina.
It is. And to talk about a team that when you say a bump in terms of quarterback play, I think they're one that really is showing this off very, very well. And actually relating back to Carolina. But and this game is going to be Broncos up against the Jags. And the reason why I'm doing that is just shouting out Teddy Bridgewater. And I get it's against the Jaguars, and that's not that difficult. But he threw for 328 yards and 2 scores, and he looked very, very good doing it. And Cortland Sutton looked fantastic, too, out at wide receiver with 159 yards of his own. And Trevor Lawrence, once again, struggled pretty hard. James Robinson, again, is not helping in fantasy. I was really high on him, and it's not working so far. But yeah, Jacksonville's 0-2. They look awful. Denver's 2-0, and they look pretty decent. So, again, Denver looking strong. Jacksonville actually opened up the scoring with a solid 25-yard pass out to Marvin Jones, but then 23 in a row from Denver put the game away. And then, shout out Jamal Agnew. Shout him out. 102-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. First of the season of anyone so far. And shout out to him because that was pretty cool. So good news for him to at least get a touchdown. 2-point pass conversion was failed. Obviously didn't really matter that much then. But he at least gets a little bit of a nod from me for getting a touchdown there. But other than that, this Jacksonville team has been woeful, to say the least. And, I mean, I don't even know what else there is honestly to say about it because it's 17 losses in a row. 17.
Yeah, and we're not going to write off Trevor Lawrence just yet. It's week 2, just like all these other quarterbacks. Let's be patient a little bit. But that being said, Trevor Lawrence, and I sent you this stat. This is per Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. 36% of Trevor Lawrence's pass attempts have been uncatchable this year. That is the highest rate in the NFL. And that being said, I'm not sure that Urban Meyer's offense is necessarily designed for NFL receivers to catch balls. I'm not sure that Urban Meyer is going to be the coach for that much longer. I know it's only his first year, but the sunny shores of Los Angeles are looking very, very nice compared to Jacksonville, where he is losing steadily and getting criticized day in, day out. And his team has looked, quite frankly, terrible. I think I'm worried. I'm seriously worried that Urban Meyer is going to ruin Trevor Lawrence. It's a real fear. Because
it's very possible.
How many guys have come into the league, struggled really, really hard early on, lost a ton of games, and then ended up being a stud? Justin Herbert last year came in, and he was instantly much, much better than Tyrod Taylor. We're not seeing Trevor Lawrence really being a lift for this team. He's more of a liability at this point, if I had to say so myself. But again, the Jacksonville Jaguars are an embarrassment to football. James Robinson not showing out this year. I watched their offensive line play, and they're missing blocks all over the place. It looks really, really sloppy. And quite frankly, this doesn't look like a team that's bought into their coaching staff.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be the downfall of this team. I'm not saying that they're already collapsed already, but to end up going all the way to get the number 1 pick or at least close to it. But next up, another team that's apparently trying really hard to get the number 1 overall pick because that's how we've been playing this season. But that is Atlanta up against Tampa Bay. Now, this game was a game that you and I both agreed very quickly that Atlanta was going to lose this game. We both called that. We both got it right on our pick. But, man, was this painful. And even last week was bad against the Eagles because we didn't think the Eagles were that good, but the game was kind of put away early. This game we actually tried during a chunk of it. A good chunk of it, the Falcons tried and looked like a competent football team. And that point was the end of the third quarter. The Falcons actually looked good, which big shout-out to Cordarrelle Patterson. Big shout-out to Cordarrelle Patterson, who played actually really well this weekend. Ended up getting 18 points in fantasy and non-PPR. Like, he played great. Nothing against Cordarrelle Patterson. The role that we wanted him to have, he did perfectly. Got to shout him out as having a great day. Unfortunately, I cannot shout out the defense since they were absolutely horrific, which, again, is expected, but still pretty sad nevertheless. We let old man Brady do basically whatever he wanted, which he typically does against the Falcons because we don't have a defense and it's still a team sport. So once again, the stupid narrative of, Matt Ryan can't ever beat Tom Brady, which of course means the Falcons can't ever beat these teams because we aren't competent. The Falcons don't win a lot, and there's a reason why. And yeah, when the Buccaneers have 10 straight games they've won, 9 straight 30-plus point performances, and again against the Falcons, it's not that difficult. Now, this is one of the few games, and I very much hate to blame Matt Ryan for things, and I won't blame him for allowing 48 points because 90% of that was not his fault. But the 2 pick sixes were pretty bad, and I will knock on him for that. That was pretty rough. Now, again, is the solution to this team get a brand new quarterback right now? No, that's not the solution right now. The solution is have a competent defense that doesn't allow 48 points in week 2 and 32 points to the Eagles in week 1. That's the problem here. Number one, if you're allowing 32 and 48 points in your first 2 weeks to the Eagles and the Bucs, and I get the Bucs are a solid offense here, but I bet you they're not going to put 48 on every team this season, and far from it. So it's still pretty depressing to watch. And also 20-0 for Tampa Bay in the fourth quarter. 20-0. After the Falcons crawled all the way back from being down by a whole bunch early on. It was 14-0 to start, and then 21-10 at halftime. And the Falcons were able to crawl all the way back. It was actually an 18-point game. It was 28-10, and the Falcons brought it back to 28-25. And then the game ended up getting out of control. But it was one of those games where it's like, you were right there. You actually had a good shot. You were playing well for a chunk of it, and then you just sort of collapsed. And it just was one where you just sort of shrug and say, okay. Falcons outgained the Buccaneers by 7 yards total in a very tight game yard-wise. Possession, we out-timed them by about 7 or 8 minutes, and first downs is only separated by 2. Again, it's the turnovers that screwed it over. It's the fourth quarter offense that just stopped. And, at least Kyle Pitts finally did something, so there's that. But it just is another day, another year, another disappointment. And thank God that we at least have the Giants up next to a team we can finally beat.
When you look at the disparity between I right now, I'm looking at how many attempts to convert a third down Tampa had. And this was actually Dean Pease's, who used to be the Titans offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator when we went to the AFC Championship. Obviously, Arthur Smith, now the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. But this was a team that actually was pretty good at getting off the field on third down. The problem was they never really got to third down. 21 first downs for Tampa Bay and only 12 third down attempts. Mm-hmm. So you got to get these teams to third down. Tampa Bay doing a great job of staying ahead of the chains and converting on the early downs, not even setting themselves up in that category. But, I mean, it is Tampa. Look, I'm not high on the Falcons. The Falcons are on my no bet list. They will forever be on my no bet list while Matt Ryan is still the quarterback. I will not, and not just that I won't bet on the Falcons. Like, I won't bet on any games involving the Falcons because it's always just such a mess like it was last week. But look, this is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They might do this to a few different teams this year. However, not in the same way because the defense didn't show up quite as well, but this was kind of reminiscent to me of Tampa Bay, Detroit, week 15 or 16 last year when Tampa Bay hung like 42 on Detroit in the first half. And I realized it wasn't all a lump sum like that in this game, but it was more of a slow, painful death for the Falcons. And to your point, they did crawl back in this game, and then the defense just absolutely crapped themselves all over the field. So not looking good for the Falcons. I'm not writing off Arthur Smith yet because it is a new offensive system. But it might be time after this offseason to look at Matt Ryan and say, what are we doing here? Because let's be real. If Justin Fields is good, that decision is going to come back and haunt Atlanta forever. That they opted to keep 36-year-old Matt Ryan and get rid of Justin Fields and pass on Justin Fields. Now in retrospect, that's a way different thing to talk about, but I still think it's worth bringing up.
That's somewhat fair, but then we also haven't seen the whole rest of the season, and Matt Ryan still has 15 games to go this year no matter what, and then Fields obviously had a nothing burger debut this week, and that's a question that's like a 10 years from now question, unfortunately. Like, you have to wait a long, and even then, it's not like there's not a draft every year where the Falcons can pick a quarterback that could end up being just as good. I mean, it's not like Matt Ryan was a top 3 overall pick when he was selected, so it's and he's been a long time solid core. I mean, this weekend he even passed the record for the most passing yards in the first 14 seasons, and he also owns the record for the most in 13 seasons, which he got the most out of any quarterback ever in their first 14 seasons in game 2 of his 14th season. So, I mean, he will still forever be on my list of most underrated NFL players of all time. I will always have Matt Ryan on that list.
But at what point do you have to say, okay, we got to start thinking about the future because this team isn't really going anywhere now?
No, and I get that that's a totally valid point. I think that both can exist fine. And that's what I mean, as in I'm not ready to jump that until we play like even
you ended up with the 4th overall pick with Matt Ryan. But you're not able, but because of his cap situation, you're not able to sign the types of free agents that you'd like to sign.
It's still very possible we end up getting that high of a pick this season anyway. So
I agree.
It's a very
I'm
long
right
season.
there with you.
This is a conversation I'm ready to pin for week 15. I think it's too early for a lot of it, but now we can move on to Dallas against LA. This was the other LA team. And this was quite the interesting matchup, a game that I thought was going to be pretty entertaining and ended up being pretty entertaining. Actually, to listen to a lot of this over a loudspeaker because I was waiting on to get into a sports bar restaurant to go with my friends. And we were waiting for quite a while, so we listened to a lot of this game just from the audio side. But, yeah, Dallas-LA was quite entertaining. The Chargers came back in this game after being down 14-3 at the end of the first quarter and brought it to be 14 all going into the fourth. Actually, a 14-11 stat line was a scoregami for a first half. That's never actually happened in the first half before, fun fact. Mostly because LA actually missed a field goal to end it, to make it 14-14. Of course, that ended up coming in later. And then Dallas ended up closing this game out in a 56-yarder drilled by Greg the Leg. So good work for Dallas to get that down. But, yeah, Pollard and Zeke together looked pretty good because Tony Pollard had himself quite the week. I think it was 140 yards and a touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. Or, sorry, 109 yards and a touchdown. And then Zeke lopped on a good chunk of his own. So, yeah, pretty impressive from the running backs here. From Dak Prescott, who only had 237 yards, no touchdowns and a pick, so not super impressive from Dak in this game. But the running job really, really was working for Dallas, which hadn't done a lot so far this season, but impressed with them at least here.
The over-under in this game was 61. And because two high-flying offenses, Dallas can't really play defense very well. And would you like to know how many punts there were in this 20-17 football game? A very average score.
I would hate
to take a guess.
10?
1.
Wait, 1?
1 punt in this entire football game ended 20-17, and the over-under was 61. Now, I didn't take it because I thought it might be a trap. I just wanted to stay away from it. But you look at the Chargers' drives: interception, field goal, touchdown, missed field goal, interception, field goal. And then for the Cowboys, it was touchdown, interception, touchdown, turnover on downs, punt, field goal. So a lot of field goal attempts, a lot of turnovers in this game. But, yeah, just an odd game. The analytics Olympics between both of these teams, and Mike McCarthy, again, not really installing any sort of faith that this is going to be a great, Super Bowl level team. I think the offense is there, certainly, but it's the coaching decisions and it's the defense at this point.
And, I have to agree with that. It's a team that was a little bit sort of waffling on how good they're going to be. Both these teams are sort of an interesting kind of not upper echelon, both sort of playoff level. So we'll see how they turn it out for the season. Next up is Minnesota up against Arizona. Two teams that have been on some sort of interesting levels this season. And starting out with that, we'll look at Minnesota here, losing this game 33-34 and a crazy ending. And yeah, this game was actually ending at around the exact same time that LA and Dallas was. And one of those games saw the kick sail through and the other did not. And this one was the one where it did not. Didn't work out too much for Minnesota. Game-winning field goal floated up and away. And Minnesota once again loses a heartbreaker game. This team could easily be 2-0, but they are 0-2, losing to the Bengals and to the Cardinals. Still haven't hosted a game But they're actually going to have 3 games at home in a row, starting with Seattle this week at 4:25, so 4:25 Eastern time. And yeah, Kirk Cousins looked pretty decent in this game, though. 22 for 32, 244 yards and 3 scores. Dalvin Cook getting 22 carries for 131, but they still couldn't get it done. The defense wasn't able to work. Kyler Murray did kind of whatever he wanted, even throwing 2 picks, still had 400 yards and 3 scores. Rondale Moore actually had a great game up at the rookie wide receiver, 7 receptions, 114 yards, and a touchdown. And if you actually remember back when I talked about my fantasy trade that I did, where I did a trade just to get some better players, and I did it when I traded away Rondale Moore and Tony Pollard to get Joe Mixon and Robbie Anderson. And I thought it was like, oh, this is a pretty solid trade. And Pollard and Rondale Moore this weekend got a combined like 30, 35 points in fantasy. They both went off this week. So that trade did not age well for me this go round. But yeah, this was a pretty impressive game for Arizona to again come out and look strong against a Minnesota team that really isn't too bad. And that's back-to-back big weeks. And who they play this week? At Jacksonville. So it looks like Arizona is still in the position to keep on rolling.
And look, I admit I was totally wrong about this game. First off, I think Mike Zimmer might have a heart event this year, just based on the roller coaster that is Kirk Cousins. Because holy crap, Kirk Cousins looked absolutely phenomenal on the day. No interceptions, 244 yards, 3 touchdowns. And Dalvin Cook was obviously incredible on the ground, like you said. But Kyler Murray, this is a video game offense. You get Kyler Murray and a freak athlete like Rondale Moore, not to mention DeAndre Hopkins, who is obviously going to take a large chunk of the defensive attention. And this was just a great game from the Cardinals offense, despite the fact that their defense, which lived in the Tennessee backfield week 1. And I don't think that the Minnesota Vikings offensive line is that good. But this defense was really not able to hurry Kirk Cousins very often. And he was getting the ball out pretty well. And obviously Dalvin Cook, being the running threat that he was and having the day on the ground that he did, helped Kirk Cousins out a lot. In terms of giving him time on some of those play action throws and giving him windows to throw to. But, I mean, what an effort from the Cardinals. And still Minnesota had a chance to win this game. I'm not sure we should write off the Vikings yet. I don't know if this is a playoff team, but it is certainly a wild card team, not in a playoff sense, but in the sense of anything could happen week to week with the Minnesota Vikings, and they might just beat anybody, and then they might come out and lay a complete egg the next week. This might be the most inconsistent team in the National Football League.
So add that to your no-bet list.
No. I see the wild card teams are pretty fun to bet on. I might put the Cardinals on my no-bet list. The Cardinals are pretty inconsistent too, just in terms of you think they're going to pull away in a game and then they let you get right back into it.
That's true too. But speaking of a game where teams would pull away and then get right back into it, up next we have the game that I know you're quite excited to talk about. And it's the fact that Tennessee is finally starting to recuperate themselves, and in a game that looked pretty impressive. Tennessee up against Seattle for the first time in over 2 years. We finally had the Seattle faithful back going on strong and going crazy, but King Henry and the Tennessee Titans were able to find a way to silence it. And this is a pretty colossal game, not just for that, but also just it was the Derrick Henry show, and it was the thing that we have been waiting forever for. I know I've been waiting forever for as a fantasy guy, but it was 9-24 Seattle at halftime. It looked like this game was nearly wrapped up, but Tennessee outscored Seattle 23-6 in the remaining second half and in overtime, and looked pretty strong doing it. Derrick Henry with 35 carries, 182 yards, and 3 scores. My goodness. And even Julio Jones got in the action with 128 yards and 6 receptions. So this was a fun game if you like good football and a lot of good offense. So this was a very, very entertaining game to watch.
This game was electric, and this team is going to put me in therapy. The Titans give me more anxiety than anything else on planet Earth because we looked exactly as flat as we looked the last couple weeks or as we did last week in the first half of this game. The secondary is still not making great calls. We gave up a massive, wide open touchdown to Freddie Swaim, I believe, in the second quarter. We kept giving up Tyler Lockett deep balls, but look at who arguably the second most important guy in this Seattle offense is. It's DK Metcalf. And who was on him the entire game? Christian Fulton, our second round pick last year. And Christian Fulton had a heck of a game because DK Metcalf was only able to get 53 yards on 6 receptions, despite being targeted 11 times. And look, the rest of the defense has to come along. We need Caleb Farley to take the field and start playing like the first round pick that he was. However, Christian Fulton is a very bright spot in this defense. And I told you last week, the Titans defense was getting pressure at a lot higher rate and with a lot more consistency than they were in 2020. And we just can't sack Kyler Murray because no one can sack Kyler Murray. You just can't get your arms around him. He's just too quick, and he's too good of a scrambling quarterback. This week, Russell Wilson was actually sacked 3 times. And if I go down to the QB pressures, yes, so we got Danico Autry had 4 pressures, 1.5 sacks. Harold Landry had 3 pressures, including 3 QB hurries. And then we have, let's see here, Chris Jackson with a pressure, Kevin Byard with a pressure, Bud Dupree with a pressure, Jeff Simmons, Big Jeff getting in with a half sack there. So the defensive line for Tennessee, I think, is the biggest difference in this year and last year, because there was a sack on Russell Wilson in a huge moment of this game that really shifted the momentum to Tennessee's side. And for anyone who is questioning whether this offense would take a serious drop-off with Arthur Smith's departure, I think you got your answer, because Todd Downing, for as much as I've criticized him, called an excellent second half. Because when you're down 24-9, especially when you have A.J. Brown, who's dropping balls uncharacteristically all over the place, and Julio Jones, when you're doing that, when you have those guys on the team, you think, oh, we're down, we got to start throwing the football. We got to start tossing the rock around a little bit. No, not at all. Give the ball to Derrick Henry, because that's when he feasts in the second half. I expect this offense to get better as the year goes along. Julio Jones finally looked like he was coming into form, and he should have had a touchdown in one of the worst calls I have ever seen on replay review.
It was very, very bad.
He was literally all the way in the end zone. There is no question his heel was not, which his toe dragged first, so it shouldn't have even been called that way, because he got both toes inbounds, and then his heel came down right close to the line. If you hyper zoom in on it, his heel was very much inbounds, and that was a terrible call. There was also a terrible taunting call early in the game, which these NFL referees are getting so soft that now they're calling taunting penalties.
It's so no fan wants that. Not a single
fan wants that. If
it's
you
so
play
bad.
in the NFL and you make a play like that, you have earned the right to taunt a receiver. And if you can't handle it, if you can't handle it, make the play next time.
I never understood that, because I also get oh, you could say, oh, well, the NFL does X or Y because to gain profits. How does this make them money? It only makes fans annoyed, and players. Why would a player sign off?
It's a bunch of rich old white dudes that own the teams. They are known as the competition committee, and they hate fun because they are rich white dudes who own teams. And that's just the nature of how their kind works. Yeah, very much not a fan of the competition committee. We need to get some young blood in there. We need Mark Cuban on the competition committee. You think Mark Cuban would outlaw taunting? No,
Not, no.
absolutely not, because he's not a million years old and he's not a crotchety old white dude billionaire.
Yeah, it's not exactly the most fun. No Fun League continues its namesake, but we got to move on now, and we'll get on to Detroit and Green Bay. This one should not take us very long, given that this game was pretty cut and dry. Detroit looked like the worst team. Green Bay looked like regular old Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers looked
in the
like
second
he
half.
was like. That's true. Second half, Green Bay was very dominant. First half was still a little slow, but finally Aaron Rodgers got out of his shell, put up a great stat line, 22 for 27, 255 yards and 4 scores. I get it's against Detroit. I get it's not that hard. Detroit is very much on their way to getting another top 5 pick. I wasn't ever expecting them to. Aaron Jones looked fantastic in this game, another great performance from him. But yeah, I mean, Detroit next up is Baltimore this weekend. I mean, just bless their hearts. But it's going to be a rough season. But at least Green Bay is finally back to their winning ways. Look like they're a whole lot better. But yeah, Aaron Rodgers and Monday Night Football, I'm usually going to trust them, especially against the Lions. This was a pretty easy game to predict.
And I would love to read you a stat here. So there is a point of liability for this Green Bay defense, which I was really high on this Green Bay defense. And Jair Alexander has not played that great this year, but he's played all right. There is a point of liability on this Green Bay defense, and that would be a man by the name of Kevin King. Kevin King might be one of the worst starting cornerbacks in the NFL because he does nothing but give up huge plays. His yards per completion against him, he was targeted 5 times in coverage, allowed 4 completions, and the passer rating against him, 118.7. Average yards per completion against him, 20.3. He gave up 81 yards of offense, just him alone.
And point on this, though, just to make a point on this, not trying to make him sound like it was not his fault, but he was actually switched into the slot spot for this game. He played 22 snaps at the slot during the Lions game this week. That's 3 more than the entire 2020 season where he played. So it was a little bit of a shift up for him. Again, it was still bad. I'm not trying to say he wasn't bad, but it was.
It's the Detroit Lions.
No, I'm not giving him. I'm not saying that it was excused.
Jared Goff.
That is at least something to note. That's all I'm saying.
No, that is something to note, but this has been
still bad.
This has been consistent for Kevin King. This is not a new thing. This is not a new, we moved him into the slot, now he's bad. No, he's been bad for like 2 years. He was the biggest liability on this defense in the playoffs, and I'm going to continue to watch him as the biggest liability on this defense the rest of the season.
And next up, we're going to move on to our AFC and NFC players and teams of the week. Always a lot of fun to go into this category. And for me, my NFC player and team of the week is Tony Pollard. Got to shout him out as the Cowboys backup and ended up being fantastic in this game. Looking like they may be going a little more with both of them considering how great he played. And then team of the week, I'm going to stick with the Carolina Panthers given their huge win over New Orleans and how they just looked that good. So impressed with those guys. So who do you have for the NFC?
For the NFC, I got Aaron Jones. And funny enough, quick story here. One of my best friends in my league was down 60 points. Or I'm sorry. Yeah, well, they're both my friends. So one of my friends was down 60 points going into Monday Night Football and had Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams and ended up coming back to win. That's how good of a week. That's how good Aaron Jones was this week. Aaron Jones was an absolute monster. 4 touchdowns on the day. I believe 1 rushing and then 3 receiving touchdowns, which is really, really impressive. So Aaron Jones, my player of the week. And then my team of the week was the Arizona Cardinals for pulling out a really tight game against a really great effort from Minnesota.
For my AFC player and team of the week, I got Derek Carr on here as quarterback. Wouldn't have thought I'd be saying this already, but I got to give him credit. 817 yards in the season. He had over 300 this week. He's been playing absolutely fantastically, and he looks to continue that through the season. And my team is going to be Baltimore here for being able to finally, as Lamar Jackson said, get the monkey off the back with finally beating the Kansas City Chiefs. And I mean, it's a big accomplishment. We know that beating this current Chiefs team is really difficult, and anyone who does it deserves a lot of credit. And credit to you, Ravens, for pulling it off. So that's what I got there.
Yeah, well, I refuse to pick the Baltimore Ravens as my team of the week, despite that they're probably the team of the week. My AFC player of the week, very obvious, King Henry. Just a monster game, put the team on his back once again. And then my team of the week will be the Buffalo Bills for going out and absolutely destroying a division opponent after looking pretty gross in week 1. Buffalo Bills could be getting back on track, so they are my team of the week. And now let's wrap this up. Let's quickly pick Thursday Night Football. Tonight is the Carolina Panthers versus the Houston Texans in a heavyweight match, and I say that completely sarcastically. Jack, who you got here?
I got the Panthers pretty cleanly. They're on the road, but they're still favored by 8. And when you know anything in the NFL, if you're favored by more than a touchdown on the road, that's pretty bad and pretty unusual too. You don't really see that very often. But yeah, Davis Mills is a guy that actually I commentated on back in high school. He was part of Greater Atlanta Christian, a high school that knocked out my high school in the first round of the playoffs my junior year. So I actually called the game with him playing and beating us. So kind of crazy that he's already now in the NFL and making his first start. So no, I don't have a lot of confidence in the Texans in this game, despite 2 not awful performances by them. I get the Jaguars are awful, and that was easy to beat, but they really didn't look that bad last year. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's very possible that Houston can put up some points and be decent here, because I think what we're forgetting is that the Jets are really bad, and they barely lost to the Panthers. So that's the one thing I'm thinking, is that I think this game will actually tell us a good amount about the Jets, because if the Texans can come out and play pretty well and Carolina ends up somehow losing this or not covering, I think that may speak on the Jets and also speak on the Panthers a little bit, because I'm obviously not convinced the Jets are any good. And if it ends up being like a really close game, maybe the Panthers really aren't all that.
Well, we talked about it earlier in the show. The Panthers right now statistically have the best defense in the league, and that has not been against phenomenal competition. But this week, they get to play Davis Mills and the Houston Texans. And I will be taking Carolina, and I will also be taking Carolina minus 4.5 in the first half. So for anyone listening to this, if you get to listen before the game, please go. I'm not going to encourage you to put a lot of money on this, but if you're feeling up to it, if you're feeling like making a little friendly wager, I very much encourage you to take Carolina minus 4.5 in the first half, because this game is going to be an absolute blowout.
I would be pretty happy to take that too. And also, even though I just talked about Davis Mills, I actually completely blanked on the fact that, oh yeah, he's the rookie quarterback starting that's never touched anything before. So yeah,
against the team which currently leads the league in defensive yards against.
This would take a miracle Heineke level effort, which that was a game nobody saw coming, and it happened. And so maybe they'll shock us, but I'm not going to.
Can I just one quick note? Can I make a confession?
Yes.
I may or may not have yelled "Have a Heineke" when Taylor Heineke scored.
That's a fair moment, though.
Crack open a Heineke.
Names that, you got to make a pun off of it.
Yeah. Crack open a Heineke, and we hope you are cracking open some cold ones tonight during Thursday Night Football. But that will do it for today's episode of the Blanket Coverage Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for tuning in. We will see you next week to discuss college football and the NFL. And we can't wait to get more further into the season so that we can, have a little better idea of what's going on. Right now, we're just kind of taking shots in the dark based on what we're seeing on the field. But as we get more evidence, we hope to make some better predictions and have some better hot takes and maybe some freezing cold takes along the way, because those are always really fun to make fun of. But once again, thank you so much for listening. I am Noah Parker.
And I'm Jack Wallace.
Peace out, y'all.